Welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. The people that I interview here have either given me my business confidence directly or inspired me in other ways. How do you turn your passion into your profession? People say that they enjoy their jobs, but how many can truly say that it is their passion? Well, let me introduce you to the inspiring Bill Sherman. Bill is an entrepreneur of 4 businesses over 20 years, and he's also the COO and Thought Leadership Practice Lead for Thought Leadership Leverage. He loves his subject, and it's the same one that I love. In this upcoming episode, Bill talks about making his passion profitable, being mindful and present in the work that he does, the importance of clarity, and how a major life event helped him to figure out what was truly important to him. But we start with the young Bill Sherman, who early in his life had a quieter, more scholarly path in mind for himself.
So I am the son of a librarian and always loved books. So as I went through school, I thought school was the greatest thing. Eventually in university, I assumed that I would go to graduate school, become a professor, teach at a 4-year university, give me a tweed sport coat with some elbow patches. I'd teach theater to undergraduates as well as then English literature. And I thought that would be the most fascinating thing. Then I saw an article in the US from the Chronicle of Higher Education where there was a data point. And that data point said that there were 1,000 applicants per tenure track position in English literature. And I looked at that and I said, that's a really lousy way to start a career. And those are poor odds. So I need to come up with a different approach. And I asked myself, okay, what do I want to do? And I laid out a couple things. I want to work with really smart people on really tough but important challenges. And I want to make an impact. And I want to find a way to be in the room with the smartest people working on the toughest problems, right? To the point where I'm always asking, am I ready to be here yet? And so that took me on a journey. I don't need to go through all of the steps, but after about 10 years in consulting focused on organizational development and running a business and a boutique consultancy there, I stumbled into the world of thought leadership, which is all about taking ideas to scale. And these days now I work with individuals and organizations that are trying to get insights and ideas out into the world to create impact. And so that initial sort of hope as I was leaving the academic environment has continued. In some ways, the way that my work days are, I feel like I've been able to carry forward the good pieces of graduate school.
Right. So you started out in one direction, realized your odds weren't good. Then you went to the smartest people in the room sort of mentality. But you're now working in the field of thought leadership. But tell us about the stages of progression within that field. I mean, were there things that you found difficult to do or easy to do? Did you find you had a natural aptitude in some respects, but not others?
So I would say that I got into thought leadership like most people get into thought leadership. You don't plan for it. You don't. Well, these days you can apply for a job in thought leadership, but 20 plus years ago, that wasn't an option. And so I stumbled into it. I was doing organizational development and I had a client who was a C-level exec who said, hey, I've got a problem. Okay. I thought it was about the organization. He was like, so I did what I thought I was supposed to do. I wrote this business book and I got it on the cover of Fast Company in the US. Now people want me to speak. They want to bring the ideas to their business. Bill, you know something about organizational development. What do I do? Because I think I've painted myself into the corner because I wrote a business book because I thought that was what C-level execs did.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was looking at the tool set that I had, having someone asking for help and saying, okay, how can I help? It wasn't the bread and butter early on of my career, but every now and then I would get this unusual call that said, hey, my friend said that I should talk to you. Usually they were an exec or someone who had written a book, or they were a keynote speaker. And it involved me jumping on a plane and going to work with them, right? And hole up and either helping them shape an idea or figure out how did they take that idea out to the world.
Let's look at that. I mean, I should say in context that you produce what I think is the greatest podcast on thought leadership. And for those who don't know this podcast, maybe tell us a little bit about that. I mean, you've got hundreds of podcasts. So let's take a slight tangent. And so, and it's a bit of context about that.
So the podcast is titled Leveraging Thought Leadership. And there's plenty of podcasts out there where you can listen to authors and academics and that, and they'll talk about whatever their expertise is. We flip that on its head and we say, okay, we know you're smart. We know that you're doing interesting things, either at the individual level or the organizational level. What we want to know is your journey and how you're doing what you're doing. We focus on the business of thought leadership, both for individuals and organizations. As an organization, thought leadership is a function. As an individual, you might be an academic, you might be a author, a speaker, a boutique consultancy CEO trying to grow the business. And we say, okay, what have you tried? What worked and what did you learn? And so we've got folks who, have published 10, 20 business books, who have been at the top of the bestsellers list and really shaped the lexicon of business, sharing what it was like for them when they first started out. Because someone like Dan Pink, everybody goes, oh, Dan Pink. It's like, no, Dan Pink was early in his career. Dan Pink, the guy that nobody knew. And we explore those stories.
So back to the Bill Sherman of younger years. I mean, were you consciously building up your sort of expertise and experience in that? What it was like on the road to Damascus kind of conversion, or was it just a gradual realization that this is not only where you were, but this is where you're going to stay for as long as you possibly could?
So I think there was the excitement and the desire, right? The question was, how do I string this together so that it could be not only a passion, but also the profession that I get to spend every day? And with that, it took time. As I said, for me, thought leadership and working with people on thought leadership began as really a moonlighting activity and didn't become full-time until 2013.
It's interesting. It's so interesting, this issue around sort of turning your passion into a profession. You spotted a passion and you were thinking about sort of, how can I make money out of this? How can I can sort of make a living out of that? Was there a sort of credibility gap early on for you in that they'd be thinking, young Bill Sherman, how can he help me? Does he really have the experience? Was there a sort of gap you had to get across in terms of when you were dealing with some of these thought leaders?
Well, and I would say yes. I mean, many of the clients early on, very accomplished people, when you're early in your career, you're hungry to get into the room to be able to work on those challenges and projects and opportunities. But also, you're basically coming in on the promise of your potential rather than your resume, right? And where you've solved those problems. And there's only so much that you can solve on raw horsepower. You have to learn by doing. You have to scrape your knee every now and then. And you have to approach with humility rather than say, hey, I know everything. But in this case, because thought leadership 20 years ago was as new of a field as it was, knowing something about a newer area was better than for people who knew nothing. And so one of the ways that you can start is if you're one or two steps ahead, that may be enough.
What about, do you still come across people, as I do, because I've sort of worked in this area, I've been very privileged to be interviewed by yourself, who are saying, yeah, but what is this thought leadership thing? I don't quite understand. Is there still a definitional stage for many, many people?
So there are folks who will say, what is thought leadership? And the definitions are all over the board, right? So I've heard people say thought leadership is pretty much just content marketing with a little bit of glitter on it. I've heard people say that thought leadership is what thought leaders do. I've also heard people say bluntly, thought leadership is what people say they do when they want to pat themselves on the back, and that it's self-congratulatory and look at me, look at me. And at the same time, I work with a number of heads of thought leadership in large organizations that are billions in US dollars revenue annually. And they've been given the mandate by senior leadership to figure out what is our thought leadership and how do we make it run effectively here, right? They don't have to come up with the ideas, but they have to make sure that it is a function where ideas are reaching the right people and creating impact and influence, right? And so that conversation is very much at a definitional level. In fact, I lead a thought leadership roundtable for heads of thought leadership where we get together once a month and we talk about issues and topics in the practice of thought leadership at the organizational level. And one of the things that I can say comfortably is they still, even within the organization, have to explain to their peers, so what is it that you do?
Mm.
What are you doing? Okay. And how do you help us, rather than is this some cushy fluff job where you're flying out to Davos and all sorts of places and doing cool things, right? How did you get on that gravy train?
Well, I've never thought of it as a grave train because I mean, there's lots of really amazing, interesting people on that. I mean,
But there's an outside perception that
mm,
it's either fluff or a gravy train.
let's talk about the practice of what you're doing. I mean, and also how it kind of chimes in the personal context because I spend my time thinking, writing, and so on. And there's only so many hours a day you can do that for. You sometimes have to oscillate between thinky tasks and doy tasks, where I'm sort of doing stuff and keeping the business going with all the admin and the marketing and so on. Do you have ways of keeping your brain fresh, if you like, in terms of when you're interviewing people or you're writing and so on? It's quite tiring, isn't it?
It is, and it can be, but I would say at the same time that having topics that are intellectually engaging keep me fresh. Where I find more difficulty is the topic switching. And so if you're going deep on three topics with clients in the course of a day, plus you have the other things about the business, and then you've got the general sort of cadence of life that you have to deal. It's those switching points that you've got to get really good at to be able to pick up a thread that you set down maybe 2 days ago or a week ago and come back and be fresh. I think the exhaustion comes when you sit there and you're going, where was I? And you're desperately fumbling trying to pick up that thread.
Have you got better at that over the years in terms of switching? And how have you got better? I'm sure listeners would be interested to know.
So I live and die by note taking
Mm.
and keep a moleskin beside almost everywhere I go, right? And I take notes, and then what I do before I jump in is I do a refresh. I just look over the last bit of notes, and that's usually enough for me, discipline wise, to activate where were we? What were we working on? If there's a document or a piece that we're working on as well, I'll put my head into it. But I create, when I can, space, a few minutes for me to make that transition. Think of it as if you were in an office, that hallway time when you're moving from meeting to meeting, you need that hallway time and you have to create it. If you try to bounce from meeting to meeting in Zoom, you go insane. And that's, I think, part of where Zoom fatigue comes in, is because there is no decompressing transition space.
That's really interesting because I think a lot of people went through that feeling and perhaps hadn't been exposed to it until they went through the lockdown. But then everybody
Right.
mentioned it, didn't they? So,
Mm-hmm.
of course, we've got Bill, the thought leader, but we've also got Bill, the businessman.
Mm-hmm.
You co-run a business with Peter Winnick called Thought Leadership Leverage. How does that work in practice when you're building a business with somebody?
So, as you've mentioned at the top of the show, I've run 4 businesses, and all of those have been co run. Different people, different personalities. But I find that I work best working in partnership with someone that I know, understand, and trust. And what it is, and for like with Peter, is finding someone whose skills complement yours, but at the same time, the values and sort of the end result of decision making gets to the same place. So on the surface, if you talk to Peter and myself, I tend to be a little bit more reflective and analytical. Peter will be quick thinking, charismatic, and he's more aligned towards the sales and business development. I'm more of an ops person at heart, but at the same point, we're both entrepreneurs. And if you were to ask us around a project or if we're scoping, we can scribble out and scope independently. We may use a different process to get to the same result, but we land on the same decision. And that's the result of having worked together in different formats. So when I was running one of my consultant companies in the mid 2000s, he was one of my clients. Okay.
Wow.
And he and I talked in, I think it was early 2013, and we were catching up, and he said, it would be fun to work together again because we'd worked for 2 years in the mid 2000s. And he said, yeah, let's do it. And so we were both running companies, and we simply said, one of us will find a project where we can bring the other in, and one of us will moonlight with the other, and we'll have a lot of fun. And so he got a thought leadership project. I started moonlighting with him, and within 60 days, we were pretty much folding the two businesses together because we realized 1+1 was more than 3, and we were having a lot of fun along the way.
It's fascinating because I'm constantly saying, or the theme that keeps coming up in a lot of these interviews is that there are many different types of personality types in being an entrepreneur, that there is this image of the sort of outgoing, swashbuckling, quick thinking sort of entrepreneur. I suppose Peter might be the more traditional sense in that sense. But of course, you can be an entrepreneur and not be like that. You can be thoughtful, reflective, and have other skills. And of course, in partnership, they're particularly strong because you've got all of the strengths, okay, in two people, but that doesn't matter, is how the business works.
Well, Peter and I have observed as well that both of us have been working together longer than either of us have been married to our partners, right? And while on the surface, there's a little bit of humor to that, there's also a lot of truth in that you've got to work on the relationship. You understand each other's foibles. You know where someone's going to be strong, where they're going to struggle, and how you help each other out, right? And as I think over the course of the career working with him, he and I have sparred with each other and debated, but there's never been a fundamental disagreement. We were always trying to get to the same result. We always trusted each other. And there have been times where he's had my back deeply on a personal level, which is just fantastic.
We want in this podcast to give the listeners the confidence that they need to succeed. And sometimes that means hearing about the sort of the challenges that they face as well as the triumphs that they've had. I mean, what's been the most difficult thing you've found, over these 20 years of entrepreneurship across sort of several companies? What's the thing that you find you've really struggled with?
So, in running a boutique consultancy, and that's what we are, we're a team of about 10. The challenge has been over the years assembling and reassembling the team to make sure that you have the right people. You're encouraging them to grow so that they're feeling good and they enjoy what they're doing. And they wake up and they're excited to work on projects and that they're capable of taking on more and more. Now, at the same time, we've had some people come join us, be with us for a while, and then move on. And each time you've got to look at the team that you have, the work that you're doing, the needs of your clients, and then say, okay, where do we either need to grow or find new skills? And so the team is never a stable thing. Just like culture, you always have to be working on it. Understanding team dynamics. And also, I guess for me, one of the biggest joys is watching people accomplish things more than they thought they could on their own. And so pitching pennies, if you will, and challenging them. And my team will look at me occasionally and they're like, yeah, you're setting me up to push me, aren't you? It's like, yeah, but you can do it.
Just so for the context for the listeners, are you working all remotely in lots of different
We are
places?
all remote. I have only worked remote. I have never had a job in an office environment, and our team is from the west coast of the US, in Canada, and we also have a team member in Iceland. So we're across the US, Canada, and Iceland.
Have you worked with anyone, just out of interest, who has always been remote and you've never actually met? I don't just mean people who come and go, like I mean sort of regular team members, because I mean that's starting to occur with a lot of people these days.
Yes.
Mm.
Yes, I have. And that, I think back to leading remote teams 20 years ago, right? In the days of dial-up internet with the modems that squealed, fax machines, and trying to I look at now and we've got Zoom, we've got Dropbox, we've got all of these tools, right? And here you are on a landline trying to talk to someone and make something come to life. It is such a different experience to lead, and the richness of the tools that are available to be able to build those relationships. Now, certainly my preference is to work with people and find excuses to get together and have that time where you can sit down and you can connect and decompress. But it's still possible, even on Zoom, you make the time. You invest in the human conversations.
So, Bill, I mean, have you had experienced any other challenges, sort of, it could be personal as well as sort of professional, which have kind of really made you reassess what you're doing and how you're doing it?
Yeah, so 2014, I was diagnosed with heart failure.
Okay.
And with that, it was difficult to walk across a room without being winded. And I defined myself much as an entrepreneur by my career, my ability to work with people, to jump on a plane, to go work with them face to face as a client. And that wasn't possible, right? I would, get up, walk across the room, sit down on the couch, and I was exhausted. And you face the questions of, okay, who am I if I'm not defining myself by my work? What if this is the end of my career in my early 40s? And fortunately, I had some very good doctors and some very good luck. And they installed a pacemaker on me and was able to take my heart function, which was, well, you look an echocardiogram of my heart when they diagnosed me, and instead of it beating, it was sort of more flopping like a fish, and I wasn't a cardiologist, but I knew that was bad, right? And I am now able to run, and I did a half marathon. And so one of the things that I had to identify and look at in that process is, what's important? What are the things that I fight to hold on and preserve in my life, in my career, in all of those things that I could spend time on? If I only have limited time and effort, what matters?
And what did matter? What occurred to you?
So a few things. The people that I've connected with deeply absolutely matter. Person gave me advice of, don't fall in love with things that don't love you back. And I think that's entirely true, right? Putting the work in on my health and going running. So for me, in clearing my head, one of the things I didn't talk about earlier, going running, I make it a part of my day, and I'll use that time to sort through what's coming ahead, a problem that I'm chewing on. And I live in Las Vegas, which many months of the year is great to go running. In high summer, when we're recording now, when it's close to 40 Celsius, you have to time your runs right. And so usually it's a 5 a.m. run before the heat of the day starts. But it's a good way to just sweep out the cobwebs and say, where am I? What's important? By the end of today, what do I need to accomplish? And if you have that clarity at the beginning of the day, then you can check in with yourself at the end of the day. And I think that's useful in an entrepreneurial sense, because entrepreneurs are often seeking the next challenge, the next stimulus, the next rush. Sometimes you've got to distill down and say, if I can only do a couple things well today, what am I doing? And am I willing to let go of everything else?
Is that also, I mean, you were probably fairly good at this anyway, sort of working in thought leadership and thinking about what you're doing, but have you found of those things that you now choose to do, sort of, have you found joy in the process of doing it, or a greater joy that actually this matters to me, the work sort of I find fulfilling, and actually I enjoy the process because I enjoy that stimulation and so on. Have you become more appreciative of that perhaps than maybe you were
Absolutely.
before?
Absolutely. So, a couple of things. It's about being present, it's about being mindful of the work that you're doing, and being fortunate of working with clients that I do like and enjoy working with on problems that I care about, right? That I understand is fortunate. But having the process, or as you said, process, um, is a structure that also allows you, and that's one of the things that I would say, going back to how do you make those transitions work? If you give yourself some structure and some rails to follow, it's a lot easier because then you're not foraying out into the wilderness each time. You have a path that you can follow and times that you veer from it. But I would say my days on the most part are joyful. And instead of Zoom fatigue, I'm looking forward to calls, whether it's like this podcast recording and you asked me and you said, "Hey, would you like to do this?" And I said, "Absolutely. What are we doing?"
Mm.
Right. Because I knew you and I would have a great conversation.
I totally subscribe to that, by the way, that in terms of the structure and the rails and so on, like I found that at the end of a day, the smartest thing I can do is plan the next day, or at the end of a week, plan the next week, and so on. And my children say, "Isn't that rather dull, Dad?" And I say, on the contrary, it actually kind of gives me the peace of mind and freedom to actually enjoy everything a lot more. And it's taken me a long, long time, about 56 years to learn to do that. But it's something now that if I was in that situation where I was like you and I was walking across the room and I'm out of breath and I thought, well, is my career over? Have I got anything else to do? I would probably still do it like that now because it would actually help me concentrate on the things that really, really matter.
Well, and you talk about that looking at the calendar or the diary for the day ahead or the week ahead. I think it also gives a little bit of peace of mind that you say, okay, those things are on the horizon, but they'll get done tomorrow or next week. I don't need to worry about them today. And I
Mm.
think as an entrepreneur, there's a desire to do all the things at once and keep going, sort of like the Energizer Bunny until 9 or 10 o'clock at night, live on coffee from dawn to dusk and just keep racing. And you can't do that.
Has your health scare, though, made you not just more appreciative of what matters, but also more effective in what you do? I don't mean from a sort of ticking clock point of view, but you just because you appreciate it, maybe it just helps you deal with any things that might have upset you or kind of created emotion that had been distracting. Actually, it's helped you to sort of keep things on the level and keep you sort of plowing on with what you want to do.
So I would say it's really impacted emotional stability and the ability to sort out the noise from the signal. What's important and what do I value? And to be much more direct if something's not working for me or this is not something that I want to focus on or do, I'll say that.
Mm.
And that selectivity really allows me the ability to shape what I want to focus my energy on because I recognize now with much greater clarity that that energy is a scarce resource and it's not infinite. It's not going to last, hundreds of years. I'm not a nuclear reactor in that sense, right? I'm battery powered.
Uh, I know this is an impossible question, but is there a single most important thing that you think you've learned on your entrepreneurial journey? I mean, you've told us quite a big thing there about, sort of like in terms of your health scale and so on, but is there a sort of a general lesson that you pass on to onto listeners at all?
So I'm a different entrepreneur than I was in my late 20s. And I know the data says that more successful companies are founded by older adults, right? It helps to have been around the block. When you're in your 20s, you want to be the young, sort of challenging individual, the Zuckerberg sort of thing who says, yeah, I don't need, or even Gates, I don't need to finish college. I'll just go and I'll build the next empire, right? For most of us, it doesn't work that way. And the ability to try to fail and to pick yourself up again and keep trying is absolutely essential. I've had 4 organizations. One of them I had to take through bankruptcy because I'd chosen a couple partners on the organizational level that didn't carry through on their commitments. And so the organization couldn't do what it needed to do. And as a result, I learned, took that lesson forward, and continue onward. I didn't say entrepreneurship wasn't for me.
Let's come into the present. And I mean, what are you up to now? Are there things that you're working on that you're particularly excited about, sort of new developments, or is it all exciting for you? I'd like to point people towards your podcast because I think it's superb. But are there things like that, or other things that you're really desperately sort of excited about that are coming down the tracks?
So one of the things that I've gotten to do over the last couple of years because of less travel is to document a lot more of thinking that I have on thought leadership. You've seen me much more active on LinkedIn, for example, but I've done a lot more work on codifying frameworks and documenting. When I was traveling 100 days a year for some 20 years, I'd get to the hotel, have dinner, want to go and rest, right? But now, one of the things that I'm excited about is the ability to take some of the tools that I've created over those 20 years, genericize them, and make them accessible to others and put them out into the world and invite feedback and say, this is how I've seen this part of thought leadership work. These are the things to look for or to look out for. And I don't see a book in my future, but I see a fair amount of short form and mid form pieces coming out. And for me, the joy is shaping those pieces and putting them out into the world because I want to build a community around thought leadership practitioners so that, like we were talking about before, people say, oh, thought leadership, I know what that is. I know what that is, that it becomes sort of like accounting, or another profession that people go, you're an accounts payable. I get what you do, right? I would be thrilled if by the end of my career, we have more people saying, oh, you're in thought leadership. Oh, I know what those folks do. I've met people like you before.
Brilliant. And if people want to find out more about you, Bill, and get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
So I am active on LinkedIn. I post most weekdays and some weekends. You've already graciously mentioned the podcast and spoken nicely of it several times. That's Leveraging Thought Leadership. And you can find me at Thought Leadership Leverage.
Okay, Bill Sherman, it's been a delight to have you on our show. I know our listeners will love some of the things that you've said and get a lot from it. So thank you ever so much for your time, Bill.
Thank you, Trevor.
Well, I love that whole interview with Bill. His passion for his subject matter shines right through. And I was also struck by how clearly he thinks and he speaks. And if I'm honest, it's something I'm a little bit jealous of. In addition, his candor around how his health scare reshaped his priorities is a great example to us all. So thank you, Bill, for a great interview. And thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast through your usual provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or about our business, Merrible Media, you can find us on LinkedIn or email me at trevor.meriden@merriblemedia.co.uk. Don't forget to join us for our next episode, but until then, thanks for listening.